Yeah. Okay. So we'll get started. Oh, I just want to say it's in Chelik Beis. So if you have Chelik Beis, it's it starts on Shin Pei Beis of Chelik Beis in Tilim. It's in Tilim Tzadik Beis, which is the Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos. Okay. Reb Yaakov has a couple of different versions of this. I'm going to give you the version that Reb Yaakov wrote here because it's the most familiar to me. But there are some other versions. Maybe next week I'll check it out other places. But this is the version that Reb Yaakov told over. As I look at it, I would say 90% of what's here is what Reb Yaakov told me. There's an added 10%. But but there's also stuff that he said to me that he didn't write over here, which is not a kasha. Again, let's remember that Rabbi Yaakov did not write a commentary on Tanach. He was sitting and learning Tanach, and when something hat reingefallen in sein Kopf, something went into his head, he said it over. He liked it. The next person who came into the house, he said it over to him. And if he had time, he wrote it down. And depending on how much time he had, that meant how much he's going to write down. He'll write it short, he'll write it long, right? So that's true about this piece as well. That, he was learning Tanakh, and something fell into his head, and he had a little bit of time to research it. Probably not allowed to, and he right away researched, then he told it over. So I don't remember exactly when he told it over to me, but I visited for Shabbos, or I came in one day on Tanach. He says, I just thought of something, right? The reason why this is an important piece is because Reb Yaakov, in a certain amount of pieces, writes V'zu Toras Emes Lefi Aniyas Taiti. He writes it extremely rarely. I told you the piece with Eved and Ish and Chayesara, he said, if I live to Mashiach, I'll tell it over to him. So that it was obviously a piece he really thought was true. That sometimes he used the word Eved, sometimes Ish by the Eved Avraham, right? So Reb Yaakov had that whole piece that he spoke about, and he felt it was the name using Eved and Ish, and he figured out when it uses one, when he used the other, he thought it was Mamash Emes. So this piece, he also writes that he thought that this is really Emes Lamito, Shel Torah. Okay?
So this is on Shin Pei Beis?
Shin Pei Beis. Do you have the second volume? It's the second volume, not the first.
Yeah. Okay,
on Sefer Tilim. The first volume's on Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, right? And the next volume is on the rest of Tanach. Right.
Oh, my mistake. I don't have days. Okay, let me print it out. Okay, go ahead.
You have Aleph?
Yeah.
Man, that's the one that's that's hard to get a hold of, the Aleph.
Yeah. Okay.
The base you may be able to get a hold of. I don't know. Does Max have Aleph or base?
Both.
Oh, yes, both.
Nice.
Okay. Anyway, it's a very interesting piece. I'm wondering if you guys didn't hear it before. But let's read it and see. Okay, so Reb Yaakov here basically tries to answer a number of very interesting questions. Some are famous questions. He's going on Sadi Beis and Tilim, which is Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos. Okay, and everybody tries to answer, what does this Mizmor have to do with Shabbos? If you look in all the Mefarshim, I'm talking Rishonim, they bring it up. Like, what does it have to do with Shabbos? The Radak, if I'm not mistaken, the Malbim has a whole piece to try to show that the kapitel has to do with Shabbos. He wants to show it has to do with Shabbos. That on Shabbos we have it's Lamalam in Ateva Shabbos, and even though it works with the Teva, but it's Lamalam. I think that's what the Malbim says, if I remember correctly. Malam and Teva, and you have to have Bitochin and Hashem and see how Hashem is running the world, which that's what the Mizmor is about, right? Anyway, so a lot of people have different pshatim. So Reb Yaakov is going to try to answer in his derech what Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos has to do with Shabbos. The second question is, Chazal say that Moshe wrote Sefer Eov. Okay, why would he write Sefer Eov? What's going on that he decided to write Sefer Eov? Right. By the way, Rav Soloveitchik introduces Kol Dodi Dofek, that famous work he wrote about Tzaddik Varalo. He introduces it as all our great leaders, including Moshe, had to struggle with this question. But he doesn't bring it from Sefer Eov. He brings it from the Torah, Hodieni Noes Drachecha, Moshe. But the fact that Moshe wrote Eov, which is Tzaddik Varalo, right? He doesn't really discuss that. I think maybe a little bit later on he does discuss Eov, right? But he doesn't discuss why Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Sefer Eov. By the way, it's when I say Chazal say this, it's a brisa that says it. If I'm not mistaken, in Baba Basra, Daf Yadalid, it's a brisa that says Moshe Rabbeinu wrote. You remember Sifro? And the question is, what does that mean, Sifro? Right? Reb Yaakov said it's Sefer Dvarim, and he wrote Parshas Bilam, and he wrote Eov. That, if I remember correctly, that's what the Gemara says, right? So, so the question is, why did he write Sefer Eov? There must have been a reason. When a person writes a sefer, it's not only just something bothers him, so he writes it. Something was going on, obviously. And then, what is the pshat in Yismach Moshe Matnal Chelko? On Shabbos we say this. I've been saying it for years, and I'm never sure what I'm saying. Yismach Moshe Matnal Chelko. What the heck is it talking about, right? Kevin Nemon Karosalo, Klut first Barshana, right? What is the Manas Chelko? Is it? Moshe was happy about Shabbos because it was a matana. The base Kinozai, the Gemara in Shabbos says, like, what's going on over there? Yismach Moshe Matnas Chelko. And then, as you know, the Gemara does say, the Medrash, I shouldn't say, it's not a Gemara, that the Jewish people had Megillot they used to study, right? They used to study on Shabbat. That's what they used to do on Shabbat. And then Paro took away the resting on Shabbat, right? When Moshe Rabbeinu came, right, he took it away from them, and they couldn't anymore read the Megillot because they didn't have a day off to read the Megillot, right? So what was written in those Megillot that they had? The Medrash doesn't tell me what the Megillot said. So here comes Reb Yaakov to answer all these questions. And it doesn't say anything about Shabbos in the whole thing, right? If it's Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos, it's relevant to Shabbos. It should say something about Shabbos. V'amafarsham dochaku, page Shimpei Gimel, dochaku leforish. Avalei miskabel alev. Whatever they say, Reb Yaakov's not comfortable with it. Vanirali, dehine amru b'medrash ki Moshe Rabbeinu amro bein Yud Aleph Mizmorim. As you know, according to the Brisa in Baba Basra, David HaMelech wrote Sefer Tehillim, and he wrote it through a number of different authors. In other words, he put together, right, a number of different authors, Mizmor Asaf, and then Moshe Rabbeinu. There is what do you call it? Yud Aleph Mizmorim that Moshe Rabbeinu said, right? Tfilah Moshe Yishalokim. There you can't deny it, right? Tfilah Moshe Yishalokim, right? So that's why it's called Sefer Tehillim. You know, there's a famous problem in the Ibn Ezra makes a sort of I don't want to say a mistake, but that's what Reb Yaakov says. I could say it, that the Ibn Ezra made a mistake and the Malbim made a mistake. That's a little bit of more of a pella. They call the Sefer Tehillim Tehilos. In the Gemara, it's called Sefer Tehillim. Okay, it's not called Tehillim. I'm going to just check in a second, but it's called Sefer Tehillim. I didn't look it up, but I'll look it up now. Sidron Shel Ksuvim, right? Rus v'Sefer Tehillim. Why didn't it say Rus Tehillim, right? Right? Rus Tehillim Eov Mishlei Koheles, right? Why does it say Sefer Tehillim? So Reb Yaakov said, everything that comes in a bunch, when you put a bunch of things together, it gets a Lashon Zachar, even though it's Lashon Nekeva. The Ibn Ezra calls it Tehillos because single one is Tehillah, right? And the same thing, the Malbim calls his commentary Tehillos. So Reb Yaakov says they didn't know the klal. Chita, chitim, beitzah, beitzim. Why? Because you never eat one chita. You eat a bunch, right? You eat a whole bunch of flour, or beitzah. When you buy beitzah, you don't buy one beitzah. You buy a package of beitzah. Today, for sure, we do that. But even then, that's what they did. So Rabbi Yaakov said that's why it's called Sefer Tehillim, because it's made up of Moshe Rabbeinu, David HaMelech, Asaph, all the different authors. What does it? The Gemara say over there about 10 or 11 authors that were in Sefer Tehillim. David, it's a compilation. A compilation is Lashon Zachar. So it's Tehillah, Tehillim. That's Reb Yaakov. Okay? What? Yeah.
Is Beitzim is Lashon Nekeva or Zachar? You have Beitzim.
I think, if I remember Reb Yaakov correctly, he said Beitzah is Lashon Nekeva, but yet you don't say Beitzot. You say Beitzim. Why?
But would you say Beitzim Triot?
Beitzim?
Like in Hebrew? Triot, if they're fresh.
Instead of Triyim.
Yeah.
Well, how does the Makolim man say?
It's like you said, it's Beitzim. It's Beitzim Triot. Okay,
that's what they say?
Yeah.
Beitzah Shalukah. Still Nekeva.
The riot to Reb Yaakov. The Makolim man is the riot to Reb Yaakov. Right, so that's what it is. No, but Reb Yaakov leaves it as a pella on the Baal and the Ibn Ezra. There wasn't no bigger Baal Dikdik than the Ibn Ezra, right? And Reb Yaakov says he calls it Tehillos. I don't remember where, but you could probably use your I don't know. Today in computers you could find the Ibn Ezra on Tanach. And see where he quotes Tehillos as opposed to Tehillim. I remember seeing it in one place. I don't remember where it is, but I remember seeing it because Reb Yaakov told it to me, and then I didn't know where it was. So, but then later on in my life, I saw it in one place. Maybe it's in more than one place, but he calls it Sefer Tehillos. But Chazal wrote Sefer Tehillim, so Reb Yaakov doesn't understand why they changed it. It says Tehillim in the text there. So we only have to figure out why they called it Tehillim, if one's Tehillah. But so Rabbi Yaakov said that's the klal and digduk. So there's Yud Aleph Mizmorim, the Gemara says in Babasra that Moshe Rabbeinu said, okay, within Tehillim. And he says, Moshe Rabbeinu Amro Ben Yud Aleph Mizmorim. He said Mizmor Shel Hashamis amongst the 11 Mizmorim that he has, right? I think it starts from Mizmor Tzadi, right? Tfilah l'Moshe Ish Elokim, and then there's 11 chapters that are all shayach to Moshe. So Reb Yaakov says that Moshe said Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos. V'nei Perakama the Baba Basra Yudal Beis Ikaman the Omar the Moshe Kosav Sefer Iyov. There's an opinion that holds that Moshe wrote Sefer Iyov. This part I don't understand because it's not a Manda Omar, right? It's the Brisa over there. The Brisa asks me Kosvam. It's all part of a Brisa, right? Sidron shall ksuv neviim, Sidron ksuv, and then mi Kosvan. It's a Brisa. So I don't know what he means that Ika Manda Omar, the Moshe Kosav Sefer. I don't remember any other. I didn't look now, but I don't remember any other Manda Omar that disagrees with this because it's a Brisa. When Eov lived, that's the Gemara talks about. When did he actually live? Or did he actually live? Right? The Gemara says, there's one Amora that says, Eov lo haya v'lo nivra. Elamashal haya. Right? But when he lived, that's a machlokis. But that Moshe wrote Sefer Eov, that everybody, I'm pretty sure, holds that way. V'hainu, the she'ela zu shel tzadik v'ralo, nitapel gam adon kol hanaviyim. that obviously that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote this to bring out the problem of tzaddik v'ralo. And even though Moshe was the Adon HaNevi'im, this is very much like Rav Soloveitchik at the beginning of Kol Didi Dofei, right? That even the Adon HaNevi'im had this issue that he had to work through. Kizeo Tochno, because that is the Tochen of Sefer Eov, is basically tzaddik v'ralo of Shel Sefer Eov. V'chei mizmor zeh, halo kol ikro muchach shezeu ikar kavanasa kedemasik b'sof dvarav lahagid ki yashar Hashem tsuri v'lo v'lasabo. He says this mizmor that we're talking about, mizmor shel Shabbos, it's also similar to that. At the end, it says lahagid ki yashar Hashem, right? Mizmor shel Shabbos, hagid baboker chazdecha v'menoscha b'leilos, and he starts talking about tzaddik v'ralo over there. He doesn't talk about Shabbos, but he talks about tzaddik v'ralo. Emasai amdosh she'elazu b'chol takva. So if Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Mizmor Shel Shabbos and he wrote Sefer Eov, right? When was he bothered with this? This is Reb Yaakov's question. When was he bothered with it? A lot of times people write this like after the Holocaust. They wrote articles on this. So when was this special time that Moshe decided I have to write up Mizmor Shel Shabbos and I have to write up Sefer Eov? Kamuvan, ki acharei shero b'nei Yisrael b'neihem es ananei hakavod tzvivam b'chol pam shoyu chotim shayaba tekef ha'onish oz lo haya makom l'sheila zu. When the Jews were in the Midbar, Reb Yaakov says, you couldn't ask that question because as soon as they did something wrong, boom. So what do you mean, tzaddik v'ralo, right? They got punished right away. You saw God, Dordeya, they mamash saw God. So there was no room to ask the question of tzaddik v'ralo. You have to say that when the Jewish people were in Egypt and they saw with their eyes that the tzaddikim compared to the Mitzrayim, Rabbi Yaakov wants you to know they weren't such great tzaddikim, but he wants you to know compared to the Mitzrayim, they were tzaddikim. So why are they getting punished from the Egyptians? The Egyptians are worse. The sof davash Mitzrayim stopped him, and at the end, the Mitzrayim actually subjugated them. Then the Jews will ask you a question: why are we getting punished from this Russia, right? So that's when Moshe Rabbeinu decided to write, according to Reb Yaakov, Sefer Eov, okay, because that deals with this issue. V'nei amrinu b'medrash heviu atur b'tur. We say in the medrash the Tur brings this in Siman Reish Pei Aleph in Orach Chaim. Ahad amrinam yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko. What does that mean? Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko. Is it? A lot of people learn it's referring to Matan Torah. B'matnas chelko. He got the Torah, right? The Torah doesn't learn that way. Dahainu shemoshe Rabbeinu bo lefaro b'tainas kazo ki kedai letoalto liyached lahem yom menucha. Moshe Rabbeinu came to Paro, and he said, for your own benefit, it's kedai to give the Jewish people a day off. Give them a Yom Menucha, right? He couldn't say it's good for the Jews, because why would Paro do anything it's good for the Jews? But he said it's worth it for you. That's why, by the way, we give people off, 1 day or 2 days a week, right? In Israel, it's more like I think like 1 day, or now it's maybe 2, Friday and Shabbos, right? But when I came to Israel, it was 1 day a week to give the people off, right? You got to give them off to get them to rest, so they don't keep working and working till they burn out, right? And there's people wrote books on these things, how important it is for the workers to be able to have time, menucha, because you're gonna destroy these slaves. Moshe Rabbeinu came to Paro, right? This is the medrash that the Torah quotes. Paro said to him, okay, I hear what you're saying. It's a good vart, right? And tell me which day you want to give off. And he picked Yom Shvi, Yom Shabbos, right? V'achar kach k'shenasa lehem Yom HaShabbos mimora u'misinai, samach al shemei atzmo bochar b'yom zeh. And after, when they came out of Egypt and they got at Mora Shabbos and Sinai, of course they got Shabbos, like Zohar is Yom HaShabbos, Shomer is Yom HaShabbos, the contrary, right? Moshe Rabbeinu was Yismach Moshe b'matnas chelko, with the matana that he got Shabbos, that he had a chelik in. He had a chelik in that because he gave it to the Jews before Mora. He gave it to the Jews before Matan Torah. So he was very happy with his chelik that he was mechaven HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
What this is saying? This is saying that Moshe guessed that what day Shabbos would be.
Moshe Rabbeinu, in other words, Reb Yaakov seems to be saying that Moshe Rabbeinu had to pick a day, and he was mechaven to the seventh day.
He didn't know that Shabbos was Shabbos. He just.
Where would we actually know that, Wayne?
Or is he saying he's samach that Hashem agreed that it should be a mitzvah?
No, he seemed to be circling the choice of the day of the week.
Right. Ubacha b'Moshe yom echad b'shavua hayni yom haShabbos v'achar kach k'shnos lehem yom haShabbos mimor misinai samach al shemei atzmo bacha b'yom zeh. Right. But it sounds like, we get so used to the others keeping the whole Torah that it sounds like Moshe Rabbeinu, knew all the 39 malachas by the time he came to Egypt. But it's not really true, Wayne. Right. He didn't know that there's such a thing as Shabbos. Right.
No, but okay. I mean, all right.
Reb Yaakov sounds like a maskil here, no? I mean, he's not assuming that they Shabbos. Tell this to Rosh Hashanah that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know he's mechaven that day should be Shabbos. You should rest, right? They'll think you're a meshugginer. They'll throw you out of the yeshiva. And of course, Moshe Rabbeinu kept Shabbos. Or he kept even the rabbanans of Shabbos. He didn't use a kli shlishi. He made tea essence before, right? I'm sure he'll tell you that. V'hine.
Why couldn't it have been a Masoret? Or why are we saying that it wasn't a Masoret down from the Avot?
To keep Shabbos?
To at least having a recognition of what Shabbos was.
So I could easily say to you, maybe there was a Masorah that there's a concept of Shabbos, according to the Chazal that they kept Shabbos, right? The Ramban brings the Chazal, but he has his own shot where it doesn't say that the Avos kept all the mitzvos. Okay, but let's assume even according to that, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't grow up with a Masorah. He grew up in Egypt, right? I'm not so sure when he was in Egypt that he mixed with the Jewish people. Once he started mixing, he had to run away. He became a fugitive. He comes back to Egypt, right? And he speaks to Paro about giving the Jews a day of rest. Now, he has an agenda here. Don't think his agenda is they should keep Shabbos. No, he has an agenda. Reb Yaakov is going to talk about the agenda here. Moshe Rabbeinu had an agenda, and he convinced Paro, in his own way, to make it beneficial for Paro to get his agenda done. V'hine la'atzmeinu nitzayer no mahayu osam achenu ameduchaim b'yom hamenucha zeh. Now Paro agreed, according to the Medrash, to give them the day off, and it turned out to be our Shabbos. Now, what do you think, Reb Yaakov says, the Jewish people did? Right?
When was this that Moshe came to Paro, though?
So that's a great question. But I remember from Reb Yaakov that was where Moshe came first to Mitzrayim, right? And I think, if I remember correctly, Reb Yaakov said Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the time wasn't up yet. You remember that piece with Reb Yaakov, the NCSY weekend, right? So at the beginning, he didn't take them out. At the beginning, he said, I want them to have a Yom Menucha. What was his agenda, Reb Yaakov's going to say? That's the day when they're going to read Sefer Eov. They're going to read Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos, right? No, it's to read his Mizmorim. He wants them to get a day off, and that way they would continue having B'tochen B'Hashem, because Tzaddik V'Ralo, but at the end, right, La'agid Baboker, like he said before, right, that Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos, it says, right, La'agid Ki Yashar Hashem, right, the whole thing is like, Right? So he says, what would they do? So Pashtus Baruch, this is where Moshe Rabbeinu first comes to Paro. Right? Kamuvan, show you they probably went to sit like in a yeshiva. A yeshiva over here doesn't mean like Ponevezh or Chevron. It means they had a yeshiva where they sat together, right? For you darshim lefneim, and they would darshim before him. Let's try to figure out, what would you say to the Jewish people who are suffering in Egypt? Kamuvan, it was to build them up that there's going to be a geula, and that they shouldn't have this big question of tzaddik v'ralo. Why are we getting so punished so many years? So according to Reb Yaakov, שבפרוח ושעים כמו עשב ויציצו כל פועל לאבן, right? היינו רק להישמדם עד היד. The what do you call it? The Rishayim who are poreach and successful, ויציצו כל פועל לאבן. היינו רק להישמדם עד היד. That's all to destroy them at the end. Right? והנה אבך יאבדו יספורדו כל פועל לאבן ותורם קראם קרני. Right? My eyes are going to see my enemies, my foes, become malay marayim. Us tismachna as night tzaddik atoma yifrach cares bavon yiskef going to lagit ki yashar Hashem v'lo avlosabo. Right? The next page. So what is Reb Yaakov saying here? Mizmor shir haliyom HaShabbos has nothing to do with Shabbos. Absolutely nothing. All those Rishonim that try to fit it into Shabbos, big mistake. Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos was the shir that they read on Shabbos. In other words, this is a riot to the Medrash, right? Because the Medrash says, right? The Medrash says that there were Megillot, right? So we always say, what kind of Megillot did they have? Who are you trying to kid? So Reb Yaakov says, what are you talking about? Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos was one Megillah, right? It was a Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos, when the Jews had off from Shabbos, they would say this Mizmor. But it has nothing to do with Shabbos. It has all to do with Tzaddik V'Ralo, to make them upbeat, so they can. And if I remember correctly, Rabbi Yaakov said, because the Golus is going to be much longer, and they're losing it. So he said to Paro, give them a day off, and Paro bought it because it was good for him. But Moshe's agenda was to give them this Megillot, and he would give them probably pieces of Eov. I don't know if he gave them the whole Sefer, but he used to write a piece and give it to them, then another piece, like what's the name of those authors that did in the newspapers? They did a week thing, Charles Dickens maybe, and
Serial.
Right?
Installments.
What?
Installments,
right? In those days, everybody got the newspaper to read the installment. So it could be that would say for Eov there were installments. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, you could check this. Okay, check this. When Reb Yaakov told this over to me, I remembered later that I don't know if you heard, a commentary on the Gemara in the back called the Rashash, Reb Shmuel Strashun. Everybody knows him, right? But I don't know if you knew that he had a son, right? The Ramash, Ramatisyo Strashun, right? If I'm not mistaken, someone in Moshe Cook wrote a biography on him. He was a huge Talmud Chacham. He was the son of Reb Shmuel Strashun, who, I don't know if you know, Reb Shmuel Strashun was a wealthy merchant, right? And he lived maybe even while the Vilna Gaon was still alive, in the late 1700s. He lived. I think his son was born, right after the Vilna Gaon passed away. But he was already born, and he lived in Vilna, and was very wealthy. And when they published the famous Shas, what we have, the Vilna Shas, right, he got his commentary in there. Now, some people say he bought his way into it. In other words, It's a great commentary, by the way. I'm not trying to put it down. He almost comments on every daf in Shas, right? It's a great commentary. But some people say that how did he get in there? He got in there because he was a merchant. He wasn't a Rav in Vilna. He wasn't a Dayan. He was a merchant in Vilna, right? So he got in there because he said, I'll help you pay for the Shas, to print the Shas, put my commentary in there. Obviously, he had the whole commentary ready. He could have published it in a separate sefer, but it was nice to have it back in the Shas, like the other thing. By the way, there's a lot of Vilna people in the Shas. So why? Because the Shas was published in Vilna. So this is a thing that we could have asked from David Kamenetsky, Zechron Livracha. We can't ask him anymore, unfortunately, but he would know this stuff inside out. He probably knew, what the Ramatyo Strashun did when he was 6, 7, 8 years old, because he had a gigantic library. Okay, so Ramatyo Strashun, I don't know where his commentary appears except in Baba Basra. In the first parak of Baba Basra, after the Rashash, you have the Ramash. Okay, and he talks about Moshe writing Sefer Iyov. Okay, and he says he thinks that Moshe Rabbeinu gave it to the Jewish people in installments, right? He gave it installments because that's the Megillos that the Jewish people read. That the Medrash says that they had Megillot, right? Look at number 63 in the bottom. Tichbad avoda al anashim, malama chayu biyad Megillah chayu mishtashim behem mishabas l'shabas. Lo mashakadosh baruch hu go alam, lefi shahayu nochim b'shabas, right? Because that's the Medrash. He's saying it word for word. This Medrash that Reb Yaakov doesn't quote it word for word, but Reb Yosef quotes it here, right? They had Megillos that they would what's the word? Mishtashim means like to delight themselves with on Shabbos, right? So Ramat Strashun says on this. On where it says Moshe wrote Sefer Iyov in Baba Basra, he says this was Sefer Iyov was in pieces. He gave them every Shabbos to read, but what he missed was Reb Yaakov's shot in Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos. Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos. If you're going to say this, so Mizmor makes perfect sense because the Mizmor is talking about Tzaddik V'Ralo, and at the end you'll see Lagid Ki Yashar Hashem Tzuriv Lo Avlasabo, right? And that was Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos. He gave them that Shel Yom HaShabbos to read. So that's what Reb Yaakov over here says.
Shurin?
Yeah.
I just have a little bit of a problem with Iyov being a popular chizuk sefer. Isn't it a little bit heavy?
Right. You mean you get pretty depressed from it?
Especially
whether you understand
installments.
What?
Whether you understand it.
Yeah, so in other words, he's showing that even though Iyov had so much tsaris and he was a tzaddik, that at the end, it worked out for him. Now, there's a long time till the end, Daniel, I admit it.
It would be problematic in
it takes a long time to get to the end. What?
So giving it over in installments would be problematic.
Well, it would, but Moshe Rabbeinu would show again, whether Iyov lived or not, or it makes a lot of sense that it would be a mashal according to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it as that's one shot in the Gemara is that mashal haya, right? Lo hayav lo nivra. He never lived. He would give this to show how Iyov had such a terrible life, and even though it was worse than the Jewish people, there's no question about it. If you read through Iyov, you see the guy had it much worse than the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, right? But so they would say, "Wow, this guy had it really bad," and at the end, it came out good. Afal PK. You have to say something like that. I'll have to check what Reb Yaakov says about Iyov. I saw he has an introduction to Iyov. Reb Yosef wrote an introduction of Reb Yaakov's to Iyov, and maybe we'll do it next week. Maybe Reb Yaakov discusses this issue. But Bigadol, Reb Yaakov's claim is that all the things that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote in Tehillim were basically to give the Jewish people chizuk. And that's the Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos. I don't know if he meant every one of the 11 things or just Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos, but definitely Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos, he says, as has nothing to do with Shabbos. It has all to do with Tzaddik Faralo, and that one fits very good, actually, Daniel, right? That one fits very good, Mishmashil Shabbos, right? But the Reb Matzio Strashun says it already on Eov, which is a little bit more difficult, but Reb Yaakov says it on both. So that's what he says over here.
Reb Shurin, where do we see that Paro accepted Moshe's advice? I mean, it seems to be the opposite. When after the first time that Moshe came to Paro, it says that he was machbid, that he didn't give them.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the pasuk over there, right? Here, what does it say over there? When Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Paro, it says, right? One second.
You should be divrei sheker.
Right. That's what it says over there. Where's that in the pasuk?
Perkei pasuk tes.
Right. That's where I am here. I'm on pasuk. 1 second.
In Emes Yaakov on the Chumash is a similar piece here, right?
Oh, it has a piece. I don't remember, but this piece, I remember I remember saying it on Tillim. Oh, but Val Yishul Divrei Sheker, he has it over there.
Yeah.
1 second. You said hey, Tess?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Tichbar avoda al nashim v'yasu ba v'al yishu b'divrei shaker. Right. So Baruch al yishu b'divrei shaker. Right. That's where the Medrash gets it. What does that mean? Al yishu b'divrei shaker. The way the translation is here, and let them here. And let them not pay attention to false words, right? They learns pay attention, but the Medrash, the art scroll, but the Medrash learns Yishu means to delight in the words, right? Mishtashim, as Reb Yaakov said, right? In other words, that they delight in those words, right? Divrei sheker. So the Medrash learns that that's referring to taking away the Yom Menucha for them, right? Techber lo avoda, because if you have so much work, you can't not work on Shabbos. If you have to create the bricks and everything, you have to work on Shabbos. So techber lo is avoda, and then they'll have to work on Shabbos, and they won't have time for the divrei sheker, right? That's the pshat where the Medrash gets it from. So Reb Yaakov was really just going on the Medrash and saying that Moshe must have had this Megillot. And the question, of course, Reb Yaakov was trying to answer is, where did they get this Megillot from? The Medrash says Megillot. So Reb Yaakov's claim is they got it from Moshe Rabbeinu. When did they get it? Probably when Moshe Rabbeinu first came to Egypt. And that's not in the text. It's not in the text. Right?
So he was, how much before this conversation was he already in Egypt? I mean, it sounds like from the Psukim that he went there immediately and he spoke to Paro, no? So
that what we see in the text, it looks like, I think you're correct. It looks like what we see in the text is he spoke to Paro right away. But according to the Medrash, you're going to have to say, right? You're going to have to say that there was a conversation before that. Okay? The only thing you could say, right, is that Moshe Rabbeinu gave this eitzah to Paro, right, when he was a kid still in Egypt. That's not so mistaber. Yeah, you could say it, but it's not so mistaber. Okay? If I'm not mistaken, there's a place where Reb Yaakov does bring it up. I'll have to look it up, Baruch. There's a place where he brings up that Moshe Rabbeinu actually gave these things when he was younger. But the Pashup shot is when he got to Egypt, he was 80 years old, and he knew the Jewish people are going to be there for a long time yet. And he went to Paro and said, listen, this was his first eitzah on how to keep the Jewish neshama alive. When that didn't work, he said, we want to leave for a few days and get an NCSY weekend. When that didn't work, so then they left completely.
But how old was Moshe when it says he went out and saw their Sivlo Sam?
When he saw the
Sivlos of
Vayar b'Sivlo Tam, right?
That's
It
that's
sounds like
cool.
how much? What does the Medrash say? How old he was? Vayigdal hayeled, right? He grew up, so he's probably 13 years old.
And that's all before he killed the Mitzri and before he left.
Right. That's before. Right. So he saw b'Sivlo Tam, and you could say he wanted to get. He didn't want them to be so veiled so much, so he wrote the Megillas for them to tell them, hang in there, Mashiach is coming. Not knowing that he's the Mashiach, right? But hang in there, Mashiach is coming, right? So I have to check. I think there's a place where Reb Yaakov discusses this, but here he's clearly saying that Moshe Rabbeinu came when he was 80, like the pasuk says. He was ben shmonim shana, and Aaron was ben shmonim v'shalosh shana, right? And it's not in the text. Baruch is correct. It's not in the text, that this whole thing, but the Medrash says it. So Reb Yaakov says, according to the Medrash, Eov makes sense, and Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos makes complete sense. A whole new pshat in the word Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos, which no one says before Reb Yaakov, right? So Reb Yaakov says here, take a look over here. V'ayin Shmos Rabbah, here's the Medrash. She'ama paro tichbar avoda al yehu mishtashim, right? V'al yehu nifashim, okay? That's based on the pasuk Val Yeshu b'divrei sheker. Al yehu mishtashim. They shouldn't delight, right? Al yehu nifashim b'yom haShabbos. They shouldn't rest on Shabbos. Vayetzu noksei ha'am v'shotra v'ayin sham. Look in the Medrash. That's the Medrash Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky wrote up for you. Reb Yaakov just paraphrases the Medrash. V'hinei ma'ayin yirk mitchila b'shah sheba Moshe taketh hemina am. Vayikdu vayishtachavu, it says. When it says the nation believed Moshe right away. V'achakach me'ida Torah shelo shamu al Moshe mikotze ruach u'me'avoda kasha. Reb Yaakov asks, umadua lo katzra rucha b'pam harishona. When Moshe came, right, originally, it says they believed him and they bowed him. So why weren't they upset? Why weren't they kotze ruach? They were in Mitzrayim for so many years. Why did they have kotzer ruach? We should show you nochim b'Shabbosos, because they were resting on Shabbos, and that at that point they believed that Moshe Rabbeinu was going to be the redeemer, because he came and he convinced Paro to let them rest on Shabbos, and he gave them Musas for him to learn. V'hayu misaskim b'Megillos shahayu kosu b'hem shem nigolim. Right? These Megillos told them that eventually you're going to get a geula. And this is Torah's emes according to my das. So, I mean, he's trying to prove it from the text, because the text says when the Moshe first came, they believed him. And then all of a sudden, after Paro's machbir aleim is avoda, they lo shamu alav mikotza ruach mavoda kasha. They couldn't listen to him. So he says, because at the beginning, they actually got a free day off on Shabbos, right? So they saw, wow, the Gula is about to come. You get a free day off on Shabbos, the Gula is coming. You know, you get a freebie, right? So you see, like, things are better for us now than they were before Moshe came. According to Reb Yaakov, the Moshe came and he gave them off for Shabbos, and Paro bought into it, right? But then, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Paro that let my people go. Then he says, oh, not so fast. Now we're going to get rid of the Shabbos for them, because what's going on? Shabbos for them meant they're going to learn about the Geula. You know, the Mesilas Yesharim brings this piece, Al Yishu B'divrei Sheker, and in Zehirus he brings it, right? He says that he proves from over here that the Yetzer Hara never gives you time to think. That's his big trick, right? Because Al Yishu B'divrei Sheker, right? He says, because he knows if you have time, you'll figure out the right thing. So he doesn't want to give you time. So that's what Paro, he brings basically, Paro didn't want the Jews to sit and learn these Megillot. He doesn't talk about Megillah. He learns the Pasuk Kipshuto, that the Jews wouldn't have time now to think about Geula, because they think about Geula, they may think about rebellion. So let's get them working very hard, right? If they have to make the bricks and everything, they have to work on Shabbos. I don't know if you heard that there was an article. I don't remember, maybe in the Hebrew paper, English paper. There was an article a couple of days ago that Bibi Netanyahu has to work on Shabbos now because he has to appear in court 3 days a week, and he doesn't have time. There's the country is very busy now. Still with its wars. So there was an article saying that I think the Agudah, Degel HaTorah, is very angry that the court keeps calling him for 3 days because now he's working on Shabbos, and he used to take off on Shabbos and not work, but he doesn't have the time, right? So they were very happy that he asked for the what do you call that thing? The pardon, right? There's obviously a lot of controversy about it and everything, but I'm saying, once you have to appear in court, you have to work on Shabbos. If the work is overwhelms you, so that's what the Jews had to start working on Shabbos, right? So Paro said, I want them to work on Shabbos because I'll give them a lot of work, so they'll work on Shabbos. They won't have time to think about these things, right? So that's what Reb Yaakov over here really says. Now, v'yesh lahavi raya, the mizmorim elu shel tefillah Moshe lo nemru acher sheyotzu miMitzrayim. He says they could bring a raya that this didn't happen after the Jews left Egypt. In other words, if you say these mizmorim were after the Jews left Egypt, then everything Reb Yaakov said falls away because Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos was to help the Jewish people in Egypt, right? So you have to say a whole new pshat if it's after. But he says I can prove it. Take a look at his proof. Sharei b'tefillah Moshe, right? In Tzadi, that's the first of the 11, right? Tefillah Moshe Ish Elokim, right? By the way, if I'm not mistaken, there is a pshat in the Gemara that Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos was originally stated by Adam Rishon in Gorim Baba Basra, and then Moshe Rabbeinu took it. It was machadish it again, right? And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, the Rishonim say this. A lot of times the Paitanim write their name in hiding on the first letter of the word, like in Zmiro Shabbos, right? The first letter of the new verse of the new, the new paragraph, right? They write a letter and then you figure it out, right? Like Shlomo Alkabetz, right? Shlomo Halevi, right? Shomar v'Zachar b'Dibarecha, right? And then it says Likra Shabbos, right? Migdash Melech, right? So Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos, Mizmor Mem Shir Shin Liyom HaShabbos Hey, right? Moshe Rabbeinu hid it in there because he didn't want to take credit because it's originally from Adam Rishon. If I'm not mistaken, Rishonim say this. Rishonim on the Siddur.
Rabbi Shurin, that it's brought in footnote 59.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. The second half of footnote 59.
59, let me just see.
Gracious Rabbi.
Ba Moshe v'chitshu al shmo Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos, right? That's the Gemara. Where is that? Oh, it's in Regish Rabbah. It's not. I thought it was a Gemara. Amar Levi, Amizmor Zeldo Rishon Amro, v'nishtakach midoro, uba Moshe v'chitshu al shmo Mizmor Shel Shabbos tov l'dos Hashem. Okay, he said that's the Medrash, but I'm telling you, the Rishonim, I forget which Rishon on a Siddur. A Rishon on a Siddur says Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos is right. Is from Moshe Rabbeinu, but it's originally from Adam, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu hid his name in there because he was machadish, but he didn't write it, right?
So why do we use that to bring in Shabbos on Friday night? Like, why do you have to say that as your way of being like Makabel Shabbos if it really doesn't have anything to do with Shabbos?
It has nothing to do. I always wondered the same thing why we do it because it says the words Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos. If you look at the Malbim, according to the Malbim, it'll fit better. I don't remember exactly what it says, but look at the Malbim on that Mizmar, and it'll fit good. Okay. He fits in that whole idea of Tzaddik V'Ralo, and Besof, it'll be good to the idea of Shabbos. He tries to fetch it in over there. Okay. But according to Reb Yaakov, you're right. It has nothing to do with Shabbos, but it says Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos, so we still read that Mizmar that the Jews read on Shabbos as like sort of the memory. so to speak, of Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos, right? So all I'm saying is that Rishonim actually say that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos, right? That's what they say. V'yesh lahavi raya, then Moshe didn't say it. Why? Because what does it say over there? Sharei b'tfil Moshe in the first of the 11, Yemesh nosenu b'hem shivim shana, v'mbvuro shmonim shana. Ve'ech yetochen sheyomer ze acher shahaya kvar yosem ben shmonim. In other words, if this was after the Jews left Egypt, how old was Moshe when the Jews left Egypt? He was probably 82. So what does he say? V'mbvuro shmonim shana. If he wrote this while they were in Egypt, when he came to Egypt, he was Shmonim Shana, so he wrote in Gvura Shmonim Shana. But if he was outside of Egypt, he was already 82. So why would he write in Gvura Shmonim Shana? He should write Tishim Shana or something, right? That's where Reb Yaakov tries to kvetch in over here, that he's proving that Moshe wrote it in Egypt, right? Right? He that's what he says. Oh, by the way, Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky puts v'chein kosav sham Reb Avram ben Ezra, right? And then he says ayin la'adoma b'Eov. I have to check that out when he writes by Eov. But that's what he says. Okay. Now the last piece I'm going to read for you, but I'm not exactly sure what Reb Yaakov. I never heard this part from Reb Yaakov. Never heard it. Everything till there I heard from Reb Yaakov, but this I didn't hear. Ela de'im nemar kain tiksha. If you say what I'm saying, right, it's a problem that things that people asked me. So obviously, after Rabbi Yaakov said this over a number of times to people, a number of people asked him a kasha. Now I never heard this from Rabbi Yaakov. It says, Perakama the Baba Basra, the Chachma. It says the Chachma. That's a mistake. That's a printing mistake. Or typing mistake, typo. The Chachma of Minavi, the Gemara says there, not the Chachma of, right? The Chachma of Minavi. Mi pasik v'Navi levav Chachma. Okay, now Navi levav Chachma is in that capital. It's in what do you call it? In the first one, Tefillah LeMoshe Ish Elokim, right? There it says over there v'Navi levav Chachma. The Gemara asks. Chachma, the Gemara says a Chacham is Odef Minavi. Why? Because it says V'Navi Lavav Chachma. A Navi has a lave of Chachma. So you need the Navi in order to be a Navi. You needed the Chachma first. So Navavi Lavav Chachma. Ha-Pirish Kan Shenavi. I think it should be Al Yedei Zeh Lavav Chachma. Rabbi Yaakov here brings up the word Navi Levav Chachma, according to the Pashup Pshat, doesn't mean a Navi. Okay? Actually, it doesn't even say V'Navi with a Yud. It says, if you remember over there, it says V'Navi, right? V'Navi Nun Beis Aleph, right? Which means, right, to bring, right? That's what Navi Levav Chachma. If you look at the translations, right? I don't know about the Art Scroll, because the Art Scroll maybe knows what the Gemara says, and they want to fit it in. But in the Art Scroll, right? It says, let's see what it says over here. Tefillah Moshe. So it says V'Navi Levav Chachma. I'm sure if you look in the Das Mikra, he doesn't learn the word Navi as the word, as a Navi, as a prophet. Here, V'Navi Levav Chachma, let's see what he says. Yud Beis. Then we shall acquire a heart of wisdom. Navi Levav Chachma. We'll bring a Levav Chachma, right? So even the Art Scroll, Nach, doesn't learn like the Gemara. So Reb Yaakov says, "Ha Pirish Kan Shenavi al Yedei Levav Chachma." I don't exactly know what he's saying. V'Hainu Hava'ah, to bring v'lo nevuah. It's not nevuah, So what does it mean? So I don't know why Reb Yaakov, I don't understand the question that they're asking Reb Yaakov. Why he's getting so bent out of shape. He says, the Gemara says that it's going on Navi Levav Chachma, right? That it's a Navi has a lave, a prophet has a lave of Chachma. So I don't know what exactly they're asking. He says, V'tiratzti, the Kivin, the Moshe Amma Mizber Zeh, V'halo haya Navi. So in other words, they're asking him, I guess it has nothing to do with the piece, he said. What they were asking him was like this. How could the Gemara say Navi Levav Chachma, that it's a Navi that had Chachma, right? It had the Navi as Chachma. The word Navi doesn't mean a prophet there. It means to bring. Okay? So Reb Yaakov says, I answered, the Kiva, the Moshe Alma Mizmer Zeh, V'hu alo haya Navi, so why is Moshe saying, let him bring me a lave of Chachma? He was already a Navi. So al karchach, a Chacham is greater than a Navi, and therefore Moshe asks, bring me Chachma. So v'hainu, dafka im amro k'shaya kvar Navi. That means he was already a Navi when he said this, which means he couldn't have said it when he was young, right? Tefillah Moshe had to be already a Navi. Right? If he said it when he was a young person, you can't bring a raya of a Navi Levav Chachma. In other words, what Reb Yaakov is saying over here is that the Gemara is proving the Navi Levav Chachma because Moshe was a Navi. And Moshe says, the Navi Levav Chachma, right? So if Moshe was a Navi, he says Navi Levav Chachma, so it must be that Chachma is even greater than a Navi, right? So the Kiva, the Karo Isha Lokim, right? Tefillah Moshe Isha Lokim, Al Kochashay Kvar Navi, Zel Kinui Navi. And once he's a Navi, the Gemara could bring a raya that Moshe says, give me Chachma, right? Moshe is saying, bring me Chachma. So you see, Moshe was a Navi. He says, bring me Chachma. So Chachma is greater than a Navi. That's the Pshat in the Gemara. It's like a whole new Pshat in the Gemara. Doesn't mean Navi Levav Chachma means the Navi has a heart of Chachma. No. Moshe Rabbeinu as a Navi said, bring me a heart of Chachma, which proves that even a Navi, Moshe was a Navi, he asks to bring me Chachma, right? I'll just finish maybe with a story, a quick story. Reb Aryeh Levine had his youngest son-in-law was named something Reb Pilachowski. He had a kollel in Rechavia. And I once went to visit him and speak to him about Reb Aryeh Levine. But we got into discussion how he got to Israel. And he said, I got to Israel because of something the Kovner Rav said to 3 rich people. That's how I got to Israel. Listen to this. I was sitting in the office of the Kovner Rav, and 3 wealthy people came in and said, we're able to buy visas out of Lithuania. Should we go? This was in 1938, I think it was. Okay? Should we leave? Because 1938, people couldn't leave already. There was no one who would take them in. But if you paid enough money, you got out. 3 wealthy people said to Kovner Rav, the Dvar Avram, Rabinovich, right? Should we leave? So he said like this. The Gemara says that Chacham is Adif Minavi. How could be such a thing that a Chacham is Adif Minavi? A Navi is the highest level, and Mesil Sisharm talks the highest. How can a Chacham be more? So he says, because a Navi is only a Navi when he speaks. A Chacham is a Chacham even when he keeps quiet. That's what he answered them. A Navi is a Navi when he speaks. He says a Nevuah. But a Chacham is even a Chacham when he keeps quiet. Shagla Chachma, Shasika, right? He says a Chacham. That's why he's greater than a Navi, because he's a Chacham even if he keeps quiet, not only if he speaks. So Rev Pilachowski heard that, okay? He heard that, and he left Europe. Why? Because what did he mean? I can't tell you out loud what to do, but a Chacham is a Chacham even when you're quiet. And they all 3 left. They all left. And he said, I left. I was in Slobodki Yeshiva, and I left that day. He said, I left that there. I got out to go to Eretz Yisrael. I may try to get to Eretz Yisrael because of what I heard in the office. That's
Rabbi Levine left then, or this?
No,
other-
Rabbi Levine was in Eretz Yisrael way before, but he left in 1938. He couldn't get to America, obviously. There was what do you call that when you don't let people into England, America? There was I forget what they call it.
Well, there was a ban. They made immigration down to 20,000 people.
Right. No, there was a ban, and there was a certain amount of people, and it was way over that already, so he couldn't get in. So a lot of people were able to go to Eretz Yisrael, still they snuck into Eretz Yisrael. So he worked it out that he could sneak into Eretz Yisrael. Right, and he came as a single guy, and then he became the youngest son-in-law of Rabbi Levine. That's what he said. But that's what he told me. That he heard the Navi Levav Chachma, Chacham Avos Minavi, right? Because a Chacham is even a Chacham when he keeps quiet. In other words, the Kovner Rav couldn't say anything at that point, but they understood from him what he meant. Okay, we'll stop here, guys. We'll take it up next week.
Sure.
Yeah, question.
Just a quick question. Like, why couldn't Reb Yaakov have just answered with regards to like the Navi Lavav Chachma, that he's bringing Chachma, then Moshe Rabbeinu wrote that already when he came back to Mitzrayim, when he was already a Navi, because he was already a Navi.
That's what he's saying, that he was already a Navi. You see, Tfil Moshe Ish Elokim, right? He's already a Navi, and that's how the Gemara is proving that Moshe Rabbeinu is asking for Chachma, right? The Navi Levav Chachma, bring me a Levav Chachma. So you see from Moshe Rabbeinu is asking that a Chachma is Adif mi Navi, because Moshe was already a Navi. So why is he asking for Chachma? So you see that it's even greater.
Okay,
it's a new pshat in that Gemara. I never heard this pshat in the Gemara. Take a look over there. They don't learn this pshat in the Gemara, right? They learn Navi Levav Chachma. Just they use the word Navi for a prophet. Rabbi Yaakov says no. It means exactly what probably the Das Mikra would say it means, but you could still bring the proof. Okay, we'll see you next week, Bezrat Hashem.
Okay.